One youth, for example, whose story we highlight in this report, was kept in solitary confinement for 400 consecutive days.
Tonight, a disturbing report on the use of segregation and pepper spray in Manitoba youth correctional facilities.
I felt a little bit abandoned. It's kind of like a slap in the face.
We wrap up our week-long look at kids in government care with the story of one young woman who aged out of the system and was left to fend for herself. And the Atikamekw Nation in Quebec has been waiting 40 years for their land claim to be resolved. Now they want to go to court to get recognition.
Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Melissa Ridgen. We begin in Ottawa, where Canada's top civil servant has delivered extraordinary testimony on the SNC Lavalin controversy. Privy Council Clerk Michael Wernick told the Justice Committee that he believes former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould can speak freely about the case.
The matter was never discussed at Cabinet. Never. So she was not giving advice to Cabinet. She was not advising the Prime Minister.
Wernick says the Prime Minister's office handled the matter with integrity. He also denies that there was inappropriate pressure on the former Justice Minister to override a decision to prosecute the company. Wilson-Raybould has cited solicitor-client privilege as the reason she's yet to tell her story. She's expected to testify at the committee next week. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was in St. John's, Newfoundland today, and questions about the SNC Lavalin scandal followed him there. Today, the focus was on Privy Council Clerk Michael Wernick's testimony that we just heard about. Wernick told then Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould there would be economic consequences from prosecuting SNC Lavalin, but that did not amount to inappropriate pressure on her. Trudeau pressed home the point of jobs when asked about Wernick's comments.
Making sure that we're protecting economic growth across the country and indeed promoting it. That is one of the fundamental jobs that anyone expects of their governments. But they, of course, expect their governments to do that in ways that respects the rule of law, that upholds the independence of our judiciary, and defends our institutions. And that is something that this government has always done. And again, I would recommend that people pay close heed to the words of the Clerk of the Privy Council. His service to this country over decades in the public service leaves him well positioned to understand what our institutions are grounded in and how to make sure that we're doing the right things as a government.
The long-awaited reconsideration report, by the National Energy Board has finally released. Has been finally released by the Trans Mountain Pipeline. On the Trans Mountain Pipeline.
If the project is approved by the government, the company must comply with 156 conditions covering a wide range of matters.
The report concludes that the Trans Mountain expansion project is in the interest of the Canadian public and it should be approved. If it is, the NEB will impose 156 conditions on the project. The NEB says marine shipping and greenhouse gas emissions could cause significant adverse environmental effects, but the board says the benefits are considerable and include increased access to diverse markets for Canadian oil and the creation of more Canadian jobs. 7 is often described as a lucky number, but the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society would disagree. The Human Rights Tribunal issued its 7th non-compliance order on Thursday against the federal government. It wants Ottawa to apply Jordan's principle to non-status children facing urgent care, at least until the tribunal starts examining the issue of identity next month. The Caring Society's executive director, Cindy Blackstock, hopes that Ottawa will comply.
I think Canada, they need to be supervised. I think the fact that we're on the 7th non-compliance order, and it just came down yesterday, really says that we can't just rely on Canada to do the right thing. We have to have that judicial supervision, and I think the tribunal's made great gains in that area for kids, but we need to keep it going.
Indigenous Services says that they are currently reviewing the ruling. 2 Manitoba organizations have just completed a joint investigation into the use of segregation and pepper spray in the province's youth correctional facilities. They started the investigation after receiving complaints from youth and the public. And as Ashley Branson reports, they're calling for a change.
An investigation into the use of segregation and pepper spray in 2 Manitoba youth facilities showed disturbing results.
What we discovered through the course of this 2-year investigation was extremely concerning, unacceptable, and must immediately change.
The Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth, along with the province's ombudsman, looked at the use of segregation and pepper spray at the Agassiz Youth Centre in Portage and the Manitoba Youth Centre in Winnipeg. They found that in 2015 and 2016, segregation was a common practice. It was used 1,455 times, 498 times lasting more than 24 hours, and 99 times lasting more than 15 days.
One youth, for example, whose story we highlight in this report, was kept in solitary confinement for 400 consecutive days.
The investigation also found that pepper spray was used in these facilities 100 times between 2012 and 2017, but incidents of pepper spray use have declined since 2016 due to de-escalation methods used in youth facilities. Penrose says segregation and pepper spray do not help the youth or communities.
Studies repeatedly show these measures are linked to decreased community safety. Solitary confinement especially is linked to higher repeat offending and increased rates of violent criminal behavior.
The Manitoba Advocate proposes recommendations for Manitoba Justice to improve services and protect the rights of youth, end solitary confinement over 24 hours, restrict segregation under 24 hours, use pepper spray only in life-threatening situations, offering more mental health supports for youth in custody, and create a mental health facility for youth in custody. Manitoba Justice Minister Cliff Cullen says Penrose's report is still being reviewed.
Youth in segregation are there because their behavior possesses a risk to themselves, to other inmates, or to staff.
The Advocate says she hasn't heard from the Justice Department regarding their recommendations. Ashley Branson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
It's time for us to take a quick break. When we come back, our Perspective series looking at kids in care wraps up. First, here's tomorrow's weather.
Starting off on the east coast, we've got -6 and sunny in Charlottetown, -12 and sunshine in St. John's, -14 and sun in Cartwright, -13 in the Grand River. Val-d'Or is 0, Chibougamau -5 with snow, Montreal 0 and sunshine. 6 is for Sarnia and London and sunny, 2 in Ottawa, -9 and sunshine in Big Trout Lake, -2 and sunny in Kapuskasing. Puck is in at -20 and snow, -10 in Norway House, -7s and snow in Gimli and Winnipeg, -6s in Barons River and Princess Harbour, -15 in snow in Swift Current, -11 in snow in Estevan, -22 in snow in Stony Rapids, -18 in Larange and snow.
Welcome back. What happens when you're 18 with no place to call home? That's the reality hundreds of youth in the child welfare system face each year in Manitoba. It's called aging out, and in some cases, the only option for youth is a homeless shelter. Brittany Hobson sat down with one young woman who was facing a life on the streets until someone stepped in to help. Here's that story.
I was aging out of care, and so they gave me this application form for asylum mission.
Less than a year ago, Judith Paul was facing homelessness. Child and Family Services had provided care for her for the past 14 years. But that day, it all ended with her social worker handing her a form for a homeless shelter. Paul had aged out.
I felt a little bit abandoned. Just kind of like a slap in the face. Like, it's up to me to take care of myself. Like, I'm my own parent. That's how it felt. Like, the government doesn't really care.
The form was an application for a youth housing program run through Silo Mission. Paul was 19 at the time and still in high school. She had her care extended, and that was about to run out. At one point, she began to fill out the application.
I didn't even think it was not okay till other people told me, like, why? Yeah. Why that option?
So you just thought that
that's what they do with every person that leaves care. Yeah, here, asylum mission.
Paul is Ojibwe and Jamaican. The now 20-year-old is soft-spoken but insightful. Born and raised in Winnipeg, she was apprehended when she was 5 years old. She spent 10 years in a foster home. When she was 15, she moved into independent living, or group homes as they're more commonly known as.
Yeah, I was in a group home in the North End. And I guess I was just kind of expecting the people around me to show me, like, how to find an apartment and get on EI, you know, for supports. It was really hard for the staff to show me how to do all that for myself. So I moved in with my sister, and she showed me a lot.
Paul relied on siblings and friends for shelter. That is until Lori Thompson showed up and offered her a place to stay. Thompson heard about Paul's situation from a relative.
When I saw what she looked like, I just felt fear. Fear because she's so small, and yet she's got to manage out there on her own, you know, and knowing the history of the system, knowing full well that she likely doesn't have those general life skills that somebody should have.
Over the past 20 years, Thompson has opened her home to more than 100 youth aging out of care. She says the practice of referring youth to homeless shelters is criminal.
This is just a recipe for disaster, sending a young woman or any young person into that type of living and expecting them to survive and make something of it.
She says in her experience, the system doesn't help prepare youth to live on their own. In 2018, 674 youth aged out of care in the province. Of those, 507 were Indigenous. According to last year's Winnipeg Street Census, 51% of people experiencing homelessness had been in care at one point in their life. 62% of them experienced homelessness within 1 year of leaving care.
It makes me really sad knowing that this is the prospect of our future generations. You know, we should be building them up and empowering them to have the biggest dreams that they can have.
A spokesperson for the government of Manitoba says social workers and youth in care are supposed to work together to create a plan to help transition that youth safely out of care. The province says this would not include a planned move to a homeless shelter, but admits it's done as a last resort.
As Paul talks about her time in care, it's clear she's still processing the experience. She recalls moments of feeling helpless after being bounced around 5 different group homes.
Just kind of felt like I was existing. They didn't really know where to put me, kind of.
Paul relies on ceremonies to keep her grounded. It's something she shares with Thompson. Since aging out, Paul has been able to reconnect with her mother for the first time since being apprehended. She hopes to graduate high school this year, and then university.
For me, yeah, I want to become more of an advocate. Like, I wouldn't mind working in those group homes with the girls.
Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
To negotiate or to litigate? That's the question right now for the Atikamekw Nation in Quebec, and the answer is not something they can agree on. Tom Fenario has the story.
Moi, j'ai grandi là, ici, tout ce territoire-là, quand j'étais jeune.
You can almost picture the memories going through Grand Chief Constant Awashish's mind when he talks about Atikamekw territory. Hunting, trapping, long walks of his grandfather through the land they call Netaskanen.
We never exchanged, we never gave away, we never sold our land.
One of Awashish's first acts after being elected Grand Chief in 2014 was to declare sovereignty over the 80,000 square kilometers of Netaskanen in central Quebec. Negotiations for a trilateral agreement with Canada and Quebec have been ongoing, but recently those negotiations hit a snag.
40 ans de négociations qui ont mené à aucun projet de société jugé satisfaisant. Alors, à partir d'aujourd'hui, nous cessons toute négociation sur les négociations territoriales et nous amorçons une démarche de requête vers le titre.
Last month, Chief Christian Awashish of Obidjwan First Nation, one of 3 Atikamekw communities, kicked off a lawsuit in Quebec Superior Court demanding recognition of their ancestral land. They're basing much of their case on the landmark 2014 APTN Nation versus British Columbia Supreme Court decision. The APTN decision was the first time a Canadian court affirmed Aboriginal title in litigation.
The situation with Silkalton is very similar with Obidjwan. It's semi-remote community, semi-nomad community, and they still use the land, they still have elders, they have their language, their way of life, so they have what it takes to actually go and prove their title.
Grand Chief Awashish studied law at the University of Ottawa. He says he understands Obidjwan's frustration, but doesn't agree that litigation is the way to go.
I think we're just going to spend 15 years, 20 years in court just to go back where we were.
Awashish is concerned that law firms will use APTN as an excuse to encourage expensive litigation for First Nations. And he's quick to mention that the APTN decision only applies to a fraction of their ancestral lands.
I want that my children, my grandchildren have a good life. That's what I want as a leader. I don't want to give them conflict. I don't want to give them unsolved dispute for the future.
Kirsten Anker has taught at the Faculty of Law at McGill University since 2007, where she specializes in Aboriginal law. She says that negotiation is generally thought to be a better course of action than litigation.
Litigation is seen as a winner-takes-all approach. So, it's high risk because you're not guaranteed to win, and if you lose everything.
Anker does add that litigation does help give leverage to a party, especially if they're dealing with an opponent that is not taking their concerns seriously. Regardless, she says taking on a powerful opponent in the courts is not to be done lightly.
General opinion is that the groups that have been the most successful, like the James Bay Cree, are often held up as a model. They have made a determined effort to act in unity, strength through unity.
Unity is not a word that describes the Atikamekw Nation in this case. And it appears that might need to change before their land claim can be resolved. Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Montreal.
Canada Goose unveiled a line of Inuit parkas and it's ruffled some feathers. That story when we come back. And here's the rest of tomorrow's weather. Off to northern Alberta, we've got -20 and snow in Fort McMurray, -21 and snow in Fort Chip, -15s and snow for Edmonton and Red Deer, -11 and snow in Lethbridge, 4 and rain in Campbell River, 6 and rain in Vancouver. Dease Lake is sunny and -13, -12 and sunshine in Fort Nelson, -17 and sunshine up in Old Crow, -12 in Whitehorse, -17 and sunshine in Norman Wells, -18 and sunny in Fort Simpson. Lots of sun up north too. Tuck is in at -23, -24 in Colville Lake. Cambridge Bay is sunshine and -30, -28 in Chesterfield and Whale Cove with a mix of sun and cloud there. Pangertung's in at -30, Clyde River -29 and Resolute, clear skies -34. Business is good for a cannabis company in Atlantic Canada. So good, they teamed up with the Mi'kmaq Friendship Centre in Halifax for job training. They hope will attract new employees. A partnership was signed between the Friendship Centre and Biome Grow. Biome has 3 grow ops in Atlantic Canada, but not just marijuana that they're growing. They need to grow more than 180 jobs within the next year, and they need to fill 40 right now. The Friendship Centre will offer training for anyone looking for work in the cannabis industry.
I think we can have a greater impact with Indigenous communities than any other sort of demographic community you can sort of categorize together. So that's why we're excited about it. Instead of just being like a blip on the radar screen, we want to be a significant impact wherever we're going, because that allows us to be sustainable on a long-term basis.
We're only as good as our relationships, and those relationships are key in everything that we do. There's no sense in me trying to do something in Halifax if it's not going to benefit all of the communities right across this province and right across Canada.
A winter clothing company launched what they call a new social entrepreneurship program. As part of their Honoring the North initiative, Canada Goose ordered an exclusive collection from 14 Inuit seamstresses. But not everyone is enthusiastic about the project. Sophie Claude Miller explains.
Canada Goose recently announced their Atigi collection. It includes anoraks, parkas, and the famous traditional Inuit amauti.
When I really started sewing was when I had my daughter, because I wanted to make her clothing.
Victoria Ukpik is a professional Inuit designer from Kangirsujuak. She wasn't aware of the Project Atigi, and according to her, neither were most Inuit.
Most of the people, I think, didn't know about this project, and it should have been well publicized, and people that wanted to try should have had a chance.
Victoria is happy for most people who took part in the project, but has concerns about the amauti patterns being used and shared with a big company such as Canada Goose.
I think Inuit should be the one that benefits from that and have the total right, and not big companies like Canada Goose to gain anything out of it, out of amauti.
The Toronto-based company says in a press release that all proceeds from the sale of the collection will go to Inuit Tapirit Kanatami. The National Inuit Organization is responsible for protecting and advancing the rights and interests of 60,000 Inuit. ITK was not involved in the planning, but will administer the proceeds of the sales, and said in an email to APTN, ITK will collect the proceeds and will bring them forward to our board of directors, which is made up of the elected leaders of each of our 4 Inuit regions, to determine how to best use these funds in Inuit communities. But Ukpik has concerns about the project.
I was really worried about our traditional amautic because I think, I know Paututi, the Women Association of Canada, they have intellectual property rights. They worked on it for a long time, and I was just worried about that part because a big company like Canada Goose, if it gets a hold of the pattern, I was really worried.
APTN asked Canada Goose numerous times for an interview, but they did not make anyone available. Sophie Claude Miller, APTN National News, Montreal.
That's your news for this Friday, capping off the week. I'm Melissa Ridgen, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for your APTN News Weekend. Have a great night.